morning, everyone, and welcome those of you who are with us in person here at Codebase, but also welcome to all of you who are on Zoom joining us online. My name is Ola Wojtkiewicz. I'm the new Executive Director at Creative Edinburgh, and I'm so happy to be starting this new series of discussions and conversations, which we called Roundtable. This stems from some feedback which we received over the last few months, and freelancers and creatives based in the city telling us that they feel that they don't often have a chance to be around the table and discuss challenges and opportunities and ideas which they have. So we thought we would try and address it. I would like to say that we were a little bit nervous about this event because we're not accessibility experts. So we reached out to colleagues from Human's Guide and Birds of Paradise and Artlink to ask for advice, and we tried our very best to think about everything, but in order to improve and do even better next time, we would love to hear your feedback. So if there's something which we should have thought of and we haven't, please let us know. We want to learn and we will learn from it. This event is possible because of recovery funding from Creative Scotland. So I'd like to acknowledge that. We're very grateful for that additional pot of money. We thought we would spend it on some new events and inviting people into the room and having speakers and having facilitators. So I'm very grateful for that. And I also wanted to say that membership to Creative Edinburgh at the moment is free of charge. So if you're not yet a member, it's very easy to join just by clicking on a link on our website. And in exchange, you get to know what's happening in Edinburgh, what are the most exciting and cutting-edge projects, what support we can offer. Our mentorship program, for example, is launching tomorrow, so it's worth becoming a member of Creative Edinburgh. So I'm not going to be speaking for any longer because we've got more introductions to come and then exciting panel discussions. So thank you so much once again, everyone, for joining us. Enjoy the morning, top up coffees, those of you who are here in person, get those lovely Japanese bagels, and speak to us, please. We really would like to get to know you better. Thank you. It's now going to say a few words on travels in Scotland.
Wrote them down so I didn't forget anything. So, good morning, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here. My name's Ashley Smith Hammond. I'm a Creative Industries Officer from Creative Scotland. I'm not sure if we're doing visual descriptions, but I'll do one. So I'm a white woman, middle-aged, long brown hair, plenty of gray, bright paisley pink and green collared shirt. So I'm really, really pleased to be here with all of you today, and those of you online as well who can join us. Creative Scotland is the public body that supports the arts, screen and creative industries across all parts of Scotland on behalf of everyone who lives, works or visits here, and we distribute funding from the Scottish Government and the National Lottery. The remit of the Creative Scotland's creative industries team is to support the development of sustainable creative businesses, which means that we take a particular interest in the skills and the knowledge and the networks available to creative people in Scotland. And Heather and Maria's project idea, which started 2 years ago? Yeah, is certainly a fundamental tool in doing that. And when they came to us with this idea, we knew immediately that it was brilliant, and then we wanted to support them to make it happen. And it has actually turned out to be brilliant and hugely successful. And we're so proud to be able to support that work. And one of the things that we are here to do today is to extend the accessibility of that work. And so we are launching the accessible versions of the Illustrated Freelancers Guide. And so those of you who are here in person will have seen the easy read version, the Braille version, the large print version, and the text only version. But for everyone online, those should be available to download online. And if you would like a printed copy, those can be made available to you. So I hope anyone that would find those helpful will please help themselves to those versions at the back, or you can reach out to Creative Scotland as well for those versions. And yeah, I think I'll just close by saying we know that some of the material that the guide covers can be really difficult to access. It might take money and time and lawyers and all sorts of things. And so it is a real service to everyone that you will have brought this information together so helpfully. I think that's plenty for me. I'm really looking forward to hearing from Heather and Maria. So I'll hand over to you.
Hello, can you hear me? Is this on? It is on. You can hear me okay? And you can hear Maria?
Can you hear me? No.
Can we make sure the online audience
Can online hear me?
Hello. Okay, I'm going to assume everything is okay, and you can wave if it isn't. So, as mentioned, we're here to do a little bit of a presentation about the Illustrated Freelancers Guide. My name's Heather Parry. I'm a writer, been a freelancer for about 10 years. Oh God, always terrifies me to think of how long I've been doing this. I'm a white woman with short bright red hair, and I'm wearing a very kind of teenage goth grown up black and white stripy shirt.
And I'm Maria. I am an illustrator and comics artist. I am a white woman with short brown hair, and I'm wearing a colorful shirt. And I'm really excited to talk about the guide. I'm not sure where to find the slides.
Oh yeah, we might need a hand finding the slides.
There you go.
Oh, it's a bit weird to not see it in front of me. But yes, the Freelancers Guide. This is what it looks like. The second edition has a yellow cover.
Maria, sorry, we just need you to shout a bit louder.
Oh, apologies. I tend to be quiet. But yes, the Illustrated Freelancers Guide looks like this now. And it's a mixture of text and image and comics. One of the things that I do as a freelancer is I particularly make nonfiction comics, kind of comics journalism or comics essays, mostly because I feel like I can explain myself better in images than in words. And so this is featured in the, oh, is that better? I can also raise my voice a bit. Great. Yeah, so like Heather, I've also been working as a freelancer for about a decade. And in that time, I felt like I was missing quite a bit of information. And so that's where this guide came from. As it says on the comic, we both started out with a few contacts, took on some underpaid gigs and worked through the night and didn't really know how to protect ourselves. But now that we have that information, it was something that we could share. I actually also brought the original pitch from January 2020, which looked like this, that we pulled together in a weekend to kind of illustrate the point that this information was necessary and what we were going to make and how images are going to be a big part of it.
Shall I give a little bit of a background? So Maria and I became friends just through kind of like being part of the creative scene. And I always find it really weird that they kind of let you set up as a freelancer, but they don't give you like a little guide that tells you how to do it. I feel the same about like buying a house or signing a rental agreement. Whenever you adult, they should give you a little printed government document that tells you how to do that adulting properly, because how else do you know? So I was like, no one tells you how to be a freelancer, and you've got to suddenly do all this kind of financial stuff. You've got to kind of think about this legal stuff. And I was really grateful to have Maria to kind of talk about freelancing with, even though we come from different disciplines, and some of our other friends as well. We just got to sharing kind of our horrible freelancing experiences and our terrible late payment issues, and throwing around ideas about like, how do you deal with this? If someone won't pay you, what do you do? What are my rights? This kind of thing. And that kind of snowballed into us having like a tax return party, because who knows how to do your tax? Nobody knows this. They don't tell you. They don't teach you in school. Crazy. So we would kind of get a few of us together, a few creative freelancers, and throw some ideas around. You know, have some pizza, have some drinks or whatever, and be like, do you know what I'm allowed to claim for expenses for this thing? And it was just really helpful. And I think we've both got a lot of strength out of sharing that information and learning from each other. So we started to think, who else needs this kind of information, and what issues are freelancers facing? Because we know our ones, but there must be loads more. So we put a kind of informal survey out on Twitter, I think, just saying, like, tell us your worst freelancing stories. And they were almost all about money. And we then thought, like, there needs to be something done about this. There needs to be some sort of guide, some sort of peer-to-peer sharing, but very accessible information. Because all this information is out there, but it's kind of buried on really dry government websites. You have to click through so much that it's not really clear what you should be following where. So even though we're, you know, mostly able-bodied, educated women, we found it difficult. So then you start thinking, well, if you've got any kind of, you know, additional challenge, that must be just so much more difficult for you to get that information. So we started thinking, how can we present it in a way that is really accessible to as many people as possible? And that's where Maria is a genius, because she does great comics work and will take things like this and make it look really good and not just a dry sheet of paper like I did.
Oh, that's so nice.
Oh yeah, and then so Creative Scotland kind of saw the work that we were doing, invited us in for a meeting, and we'd like to show up with something. So we put together this printed document in a weekend, and we're like, here's what we'd like to do. We're also just going to leave a few of these around the office so you won't forget about us.
I think it's really helpful to have something in print in front of you. I was also going to show 10 years ago, when I was starting out as a freelancer, I was recommended this book, which has a very beautiful cover, and I was promised a very beautiful book. And then the inside is blocks of text. And in the 10 years I've had this book, I have never read it. So a lot of, like, the freelancer's guide is the way that the information also just made it easier for me to digest. And it's divided into 5 chapters. So each one has a little bit of information and some kind of case studies about becoming a freelancer, operating as a freelancer, protecting yourself, stuff like contracts, what to do when things go wrong. That was my first illustration, actually, putting out the fire of all of the things that suck, and collective organizing. And just a little bit about what it looks like. This is it on, as it looks like on screen, but obviously also in print. Each chapter is a single color and has sort of spot illustrations through it to kind of clarify a little bit of the messages, and kind of boxes of where we wanted to highlight information. So this part is a bit about what it means to be a freelancer or a sole trader, the different kinds of freelancers that might exist. So for example, somebody might work full-time as a freelancer, and others, like me, for example, won't.
It was really interesting for me to sit down and start writing this book, because you think you know things, you've been operating in a certain way, and then you think, actually, I actually don't know what a freelancer is in legal terms, or, like, you know, is a sole, what does self-employed mean? And it means different things to HMRC. I always say HRMC. I say the wrong one even now. So HMRC, Her Majesty. Yeah. So yeah, I started to think, I can't believe I've agreed to spend like 3 to 4 months of my life sifting through this information. It really might be the end of me. But it just sort of underscored for me how important this is, because even the information that is out there isn't really clear. And the way we use words isn't really how they're used by the legal entities or the government bodies and things like this. So I was absolutely thrilled to just give Maria this information, and she would make it look beautiful and accessible. And I really love the color coding of the chapters as well. That makes me feel very soothed.
Well, I'm glad. I will say one of the other aspects of the guide I love that it's in print, but the useful thing about it existing digitally is that the links also work, so you can use it in that way. And also including images to just clarify information or have infographics, so just literally what does 20% tax mean? Obviously, if I only earned £5 a year, they wouldn't take £1 in tax, but imagine they are units instead of a sum of money that you would actually get taxed on.
I should probably say as well, like one of the sort of things that brought this project forward was that anytime I kind of learned anything about how to do my taxes as a freelancer, I would like do a kind of tax thread on, you know, January 25th when everyone's doing their tax, even though they've had 8 months to do it before then. And just be like, hey, I learned this, by the way, and didn't know it before. And these Twitter threads would just get like wild numbers. And it's like people would then kind of DM you to ask you, and you have to go, I'm not a tax expert. Like I really am not a tax expert, but this is what we kind of think. So the peer-to-peer like nature of that was really, it felt really empowering and a tiny little bit scary. But that was kind of what brought us to talk about these kind of things and try and present them in a way that was, you know, relatable. Hence, here's £1 going away.
One thing I kind of want to add on that is that as a Canadian, we all have to file our own taxes, whether or not you are self-employed. And so it's extra wild to me that we were not taught in school how to do that when everyone had to, like beyond not learning it in art school. So yeah, a bit more clarification on tax. With what do the tax bands mean? What does this look like? How much money do I pay in tax? I think being able to see it visually helps me at least. And it does have kind of these blocks of information throughout the guide that kind of sit slightly outside the main text and these pro tips.
One challenge about doing work like this is that they change. You just have just done the work to get all this information into a form and then they change it. So that's a kind of ongoing challenge for us to keep it updated.
Oh yeah, I think this is actually the old one. So I apologize, the numbers are slightly different.
Don't make notes on this and do your taxes by it. Get the new one.
Just see the one that's currently on the website. And also reminders. This is also like the peer-to-peer empowerment thing of what I will say to my peers and what my peers always tell me is make sure that you're getting paid enough, raise your rates, all the stuff that I feel like I need a reminder of for myself. And that's what we tried to do with the guide as well, having like these little characters in it, being like, do the things that are good for you.
One thing as well is that we didn't want this to be kind of the end point for anyone. Like this is not an end point. This should be a start point of finding where to find out more information. You know, we're both members of unions, creative unions, and that's the thing we feel really strongly about. You know, like I work for the Society of Authors now as well, and they will go over contracts for you. They will help you kind of negotiate. They will help you set your rates. I know the Association of Illustrators does this as well. And as creative freelancers, it was really important for us to say, we can't tell you everything, and peer-to-peer stuff is not just the be-all and end-all. A union is a collective body, and that will always be more powerful than people on their own. So that's why we really wanted to kind of signpost this kind of stuff. And later on as well, we talk about disability collectives who, you know, are doing the work for disabled freelancers and things like this. So yeah, we wanted to just be like, we don't have all the answers, but also if you have some answers, join one of these groups and start being a part of it as well.
Yeah, this is not what we agreed. I've been there many times. Yeah, one thing that was nice about having comics in it originally, because there was a survey and people were telling us their stories. That's the idea of having comics for case studies was just always there, but then it turned into kind of hypotheticals, but based on real life scenarios. To model what might happen in a situation where maybe like in this case, a client changes up what they need from you on short notice, what is the conversation you need to have with yourself to make that work for you?
I feel like I should say what is the disclaimer they say on films? Any resemblance to any real life situation is purely coincidental. But yeah, I love the way that Maria's been able to work with the comics is to show the workflow, to model conversations, model difficult conversations, model issues that might come up, things that people have been through, all hypothetical, as you say, because one barrier to getting out this kind of information and for freelancers to protect themselves and their rights is that often if you have an issue with a large company, you can't publicly talk about it, even if they are in the wrong, because they can sue you for defamation, for instance. And even just crowdfunding for legal costs to fight that kind of legal challenge is also evidence of you defaming them. There's a lot of complicated things and it stops people sharing this information. So these are all hypothetical. But I find this kind of stuff really useful as well. Like, how do you stop yourself from ending up working for no payment? And the kind of kill fees is a new one to me because we don't really do that in writing. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so a kill fee is standard in illustration. The Association of Illustrators does have a template contract, and one of the things in it is the kill fee, and it's very useful for illustration because you do have to do a lot of work before it's signed off, and sometimes the project will be canceled, sometimes they decide to go with a different illustrator. Sometimes certain companies will kind of make it their business to bring lots of illustrators to a certain level of completion for the project and then actually just choose one. You should be paid for the work that you did. And I find it really useful to have this in my contract because I've still done the hours. And also just the very important thing of not starting work until we have a contract in place. Because I mean, also that's because I need a kill fee. Why do you want me to work before we've signed a contract? Sketch.
I'm always very happy to talk about my favorite piece of legislation in the world, which is the Late Payment of Commercial Debts Interest Act 1998. And this means that if you get paid, for the vast majority of cases, if you get paid more than 30 days late after you've issued your invoice, they owe you money. They owe you a late fee. You can charge interest. It's your right. And not only is it your right, by doing it, you're normalizing other freelancers being paid within 30 days because you can't tell your landlord, well, it's coming in 3 to 6 weeks or the future. So always very glad to have that in there and to talk about it because I'm glad it exists.
Yeah, you don't need this in any contract or on your invoices because it's the law, but it does help.
Yes.
I think it should always be in the contracts.
So yeah, this is, again, I was just signaling to other people that, like, if you have, if you're working in a particular genre or you have a particular interest, there will be groups who are organizing around that, and you should reach out to them. And I would like to just say that, again, these are all great organizations. Please do reach out to them.
And also, just a note that, like, as a freelancer, you have to take care of yourself as much as possible, and know that, like, say for example, that as an illustrator, I can hit a limit of if I draw too much, suddenly my wrist hurts and then I can't draw for a week. I need to make sure that I'm doing my stretches and everything like that, and remind myself that my wrists are my job.
This is probably something that we can talk about in the discussion afterwards, but it's also something we could have written an entire different guide on. How do you take care of yourself when you're a freelancer? When you don't get sick leave, you know, you can do things like you can pay for income insurance, which is where you pay a little bit per month. And if you found yourself unable to work after a 3-month period, it would pay money out to cover like your mortgage or your rent or whatever. But this is all additional things on a freelancer. You have to have the excess money available to pay for that kind of insurance, which I'm sure many of us know that's not always the case. And how do you say to people, you need to take time off as a freelancer because you're suffering burnout, when that means they don't get any money. These are all huge challenges, I think, and there are challenges to people becoming freelancers as well. If you have a disability, if you have a chronic illness, you need to know that you're going to be able to take sick leave, but that isn't available for freelancers. And I don't have any answer to that apart from UBI would be great, but just saying.
Yeah, much of this I think boils down to UBI.
UBI, not just saying UBI, but so yeah, we wanted to talk about what you can do when you're not paid properly, when people don't stick to the contract, when people sort of steamroll it over your rights, and that was a fun, if difficult, section to write because there's too many available bad things to happen to a freelancer.
Yeah, it is quite difficult. And the amount of hours that you also spend as a freelancer just managing those situations and like writing those emails all the time. I find it helpful to have just template emails, and there are some in the guide as well, but template emails also for myself that I tend to have to send out lots of times of, please pay me, this is late. Which is something that, even now, sometimes I struggle to do because I worry about affecting a relationship with a client or something like that. But also, I need to be paid for my work. And so I found this timeline quite helpful. I feel like I should just have it on my wall.
Just print out a giant poster for my office.
31, re-invoicing.
And the thing about this kind of stuff that I think gets lost in conversations about freelancers' rights is it's so much work. So I think the statistic is something like freelancers lose 20 days on average to chasing payment, to dealing with these kind of admin issues. And if anyone has worked for a university, you'll know that it is absolutely ridiculous. You have to do so much work. You have to do so much to be paid from what might amount to like £100 appearance fee or something like this. And it just eats away at you. But also, if you have any sort of executive dysfunction, all this stuff is increasingly difficult. And people are very bad at employing freelancers. And the thing that we kept coming to throughout this process is, yes, we're talking about freelancers, we're empowering freelancers, but also we need to write a guide for organizations on how to work with freelancers, because there's only so much you can do with this information if the people employing you don't do what they should do as well.
Mm-hmm. Especially when it is like a large organization that is telling you, it's our policy to not pay you for 6 months.
Yeah, which is illegal, by the way. We've got 2 minutes left, so should we skip through a little bit?
There's just a couple slides.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
So one of the chapters is on collective organizing. And like we said, that there are unions and professional bodies that are maybe more specific to the kind of freelancing that you do. They would be worth checking out. I found the Association of Illustrators and the Society of Authors very helpful with specifically contracts, like big scary things that I really needed help with. And I also just wanted to mention the appendix, so that aspect of all the extra work that a freelancer does with chasing payment and responding to queries about working for free. Had one of those last week. This is some template emails that you can just use.
This was really fun to write. So I wrote the original, what I would want to send. And I pared that down to what was a slightly more professional. And I pared that down again to what we can actually tell people to say. So do feel free to take these and make them your own, I would say.
I would love to see this as a standard thing.
Yeah.
So that, any organization that regularly employs freelancers knows to not let it get to this point.
Yes. We also were able to provide a contract template at the end, which is quite legal easy because they are, but it is there just in case you don't have any kind of contract in place. But I will say that creative unions can also help you with those. They can also vet contracts for you to make sure you're not signing anything that's a bad deal for you. And then
this is the guide as it is available. So on the Creative Scotland website, it is in PDF format, plain text and easy read, and there's also like the printed copies that are here. I'm personally really happy to see it in print. It was always meant to be a book.
Yeah, it was a huge concern for us that it should be in print, because it's very difficult to take in this kind of information digitally for a lot of people. I'm one of those people as well. Much prefer to deal with things in a printed form. From an accessibility perspective, you know, there are so many versions that we really needed to do, and I'm really glad that we've been able to get these through. And I will say thank you to Creative Scotland for making that happen as well. And I love the Braille one. I'm like obsessed with the Braille one.
That's all fun.
That's us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So much. Thank you, Heather and Marianne. Thank you for taking the initiative to create that book. So I would love to invite Jen and Callum up to the fake stage to continue having a chat and talk about all the issues around accessibility. Thank you to everyone online who's engaging with us. If there's anything you don't, oh, you're hearing, Maria. If there's anything you don't hear for the audience online, please let us know. It's our first hybrid event, so please bear with us as well. You have one microphone? That's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Hello, my name's Callum Macdonald. I am a white man in my early 30s. I've got mid-length brown hair and I'm wearing a coral shirt today. And I'm joined by Jen, Maria and Heather here. And we're going to be taking the conversation a bit wider this morning and talking about the guides and how it relates more widely to accessibility. Jen, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Jen. If you want the visual description, I am white. I have very fake red hair that is back in a plait. I wear a lot of black and I have a red stick. Yeah, I'm a theatre director, playwright, dramaturg. Theatre maker is probably the most sort of all-encompassing term. And I've been doing this for a bit over 10 years, I think. Yeah, that's me.
And we've already had an introduction from Heather and Maria, who are the co-creators of the Illustrated Freelancers guide and a writer and an illustrator. Thanks very much for joining us. To start off, I would like to ask you, are there any examples of good practice around accessibility and dismantling obstacles that you have seen or implemented yourself? Would anyone like to answer this now, Heather?
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Jen. I'll try not to. Yes, I can think of one example, and I'm going to point to Marv and Cunningham in the front row here. Marv and Catherine Welsh with Culture Collective have been doing really good work. Their whole program has been really inclusive, really accessible. I was really happy to be a part of a live podcast recording that was hugely accessible, and they pay properly and on time, like within kind of minutes, which is lovely. Yeah, mouth wide open is the correct response to that. But Marv might be able to sort of speak to why that was possible. I think that funding is probably one of the key issues, right?
Sorry.
It does stretch, so it's okay. Yeah, it is a lot of money sometimes, and I think that that's something that is not necessarily acknowledged. And I know that as the world starts to open up, hybridity is getting lost. So I think it's great that Creative Edinburgh are actually choosing to go with hybrid and continue to do hybrid. Although this is your first event, and it looks great. There is amazing things such as having a BSL interpreter who doesn't have to come to an event. If you do hybrid, they can be interpreting from their living room. It's a very nice living room, Jenny. So there are ways to save cash on that. But I think also it's great that Creative Scotland are here and thinking about that, because I think that we should be having accessibility built into budgets, and stuff like captioning, live captioning if possible, BSL interpretation, audio description should just be automatic, a no-brainer, but it does cost money, so please fund us to do that.
I think that's a brilliant point about working things into budgets Accessibility is often seen as an add-on rather than something as central as health and safety or just integral to a project. Any good examples of good practice at the moment you'd like to share? Jen.
So the reason I'm hesitant is possibly because it's always easier to reach for the bad examples. I've been very impressed with some of the stuff that the EPAD has been doing, the Edinburgh Performing Arts Development. And this is less about specific things that they've done in terms of accommodation and accessibility, and more about the environment they create. Because what I've found in my dealings with them is that they've always made it feel like it was okay to explain the things that you need. And that it was always absolutely okay to need those things. And sadly, that's not necessarily a universal attitude. They're also really prompt payers, which is very, very nice. Also, I did some work for the Scottish Storytelling Forum last year, and was quite impressed that because they work with a lot of people who are coming to them possibly for a first-time freelance gig, they have an invoice template ready to go. It's really, really simple. It doesn't ask anything from you that isn't legally required, which a lot of invoicing systems do. And I spend a lot of time going, you do not need to know that about me. So it's little things like that that not only make it easier if you're dealing with things like executive dysfunction or dyslexia or anything that sort of complicates your dealing with admin, but just for everybody. That is genuinely just something that makes life a little easier for whoever happens to cross their path. Which again, it's that thing that you were saying, Heather, about the normalizing of these things, the making it not an issue. Because such a lot of the time it can be.
I think that's a very interesting point, that the more accessible you make something, you're making it better for everyone, whether they have access needs or not, or whether it intersects with something else. So it's always has value. You were showing off an example of bad practice earlier. Do you have any examples of good practice, Maria?
Oh, well, one thing I just wanted to mention was I think the transparency aspect is so important. And yeah, I loved the note about like they pay on time, they pay well. And a lot of freelancers will talk to each other and like kind of build up this information with themselves. There is a website for illustrators called Lightbox, LITEBOX.com. And what it is it's a rate sharing website, and people will say, this client, and I'll name them, paid me this much for this job. And then some notes, and people will add notes like, they paid, but it took 2 years. Or they were great. It was all like smooth and worked great. And I would love to see more transparency in all aspects of freelancing, especially that the notes about invoicing. I had a client, also a university, ask me months before this project will end to fill out a form so that I can be paid on time in the future, which is a band-aid, but still addressing, I guess, the mess of work that needs to be done to just get paid for a little job.
Sorry, Callum. Just to speak to that kind of issue as well, because I think that invoicing is actually a very under-discussed thing, because not only is it time, like you said, it's executive dysfunction, you're really requiring a level of literacy and numeracy from people, which is kind of, you know, it's a real additional. We can't take it for granted, excuse me, that people have this, but also there needs to be, in larger organizations, a way for dealing with freelancers that isn't the same excuse me, frog in my throat, of dealing with companies. So I know someone who recently did, I think, literally a £50 talk for university, and they had to complete a 22-page form. And this is after they've set you up as a contractor, independent contractor or something, which you have to do before the event. And one of the things they had to sign was like a modern slavery declaration, which I think is for companies with a turnover of £35 million or something. And you're like, I wouldn't be doing this event if I had a turnover of £35 million. My rates would be higher. But it's not only like the amount of time it takes, it's the frustration. It's the trying to say to people, is there no possible way that you can pay me that doesn't involve this? And they're kind of trying to fight the system, but also coming to something like that can be really anxiety inducing, again, because you're on your own, you don't have help with this stuff. So I really want to, if you're a large organization, I would really say, please look at the way you pay freelancers, you deal with them, and see if you can simplify it in any way, because it is a huge access issue, I think.
Can I, sorry, Callum, you're not getting this back. Can I just ask, who here is from a large organization? Stick a hand up if you are. I mean, Creative Edinburgh, Creative Scotland, we've already got you, but anyone else working for universities, anything like that? Well, there's a surprise. And this is part of the problem. They are not here. They are never here. They are never at these events, and they are not that interested. And that is the biggest access issue in terms of creating those kind of systems. They do not listen when we tell them that these systems need to exist, because it's much, much easier for them just not to change anything. I no longer do work for universities unless I'm doing so as a subsidiary of someone who is already set up on their systems, because it is not worth the angst. I will say, I did some work for a university in Germany a little while ago, and they paid me within 4 days and apologized for the late payment.
Thank you very much. Why do you think good practice isn't more commonplace in Scotland and creative industries in Edinburgh? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I have two. Thank you. First thought is that, to a certain extent, as I've just said, it's simply easier for people not to do this. So there's a certain amount of inertia that we're up against. Second, it is a complex thing. You know, it is difficult. And I think people understand some of the more easy to grasp aspects, like having wheelchair ramps and using BSL and things like that. And I think it's very easy for people to look at those things and think, right, job done, box ticked, pat on the back, we're good, accessible people. And sometimes there is a lot more to it than that, and access needs can be very, very complex. I think particularly where they overlap with things like payment systems, where people will assume that you have a level of support that you don't necessarily have, will assume that you are able to perfectly articulate your own access needs if you are asked, and will assume that you have the capacity to advocate for yourself if you're not asked. They will also assume that if you are able to be as articulate as this, you do not have access needs. And that's kind of an issue. They also assume that access needs go with a severe level of disability, which is not necessarily the case. I would guess that there are quite a lot of you in this room who, even if you don't consider yourself to have a disability, do have an access need of some kind, even if it's as simple as, you know, like wearing contact lenses, or, you know, just knowing that you need to sit in a particular part of the room so that you can see. That most of us found out when people started masking for COVID that we lip read a lot more than we thought we did. I'm stuck in this constant battle at the moment between the fact that I have an antibody deficiency and I don't respond all that well to vaccines, so I feel the need to be masked as much as I can, with the fact that you need to see my face, you need to see my lips. This is a really difficult circle to square. And I think that's a big part of the problem. We are all overworked, burned out, very tired, particularly if you're a freelancer trying to accommodate other freelancers' access needs. I'm sorry, I'm over talking, but I'm not going to stop. We are all in a situation where we may have the best will to help each other, but we don't necessarily have the capacity within ourselves. This comes back once again to payment. You know, there are tasks that it would be a lot easier for me to outsource to someone else. I don't do it because I can't afford it. And because I know that if I build in certain fees into my work as a freelancer, I'll be considered too expensive and I won't get paid. I'm aware that there are organizations out there that can help me with this. That's another form I need to fill in. That's another email I have to send, another contact I have to make. So my workload goes up in order to get my workload possibly reduced, maybe if I qualify, and if they have the resources to accommodate me. I'm knackered, guys. And I'm sure this is true of a lot of you. A lot of us just look at these tasks and go, is this going to be easier or harder than doing it myself? And we stick to the devil we know. And that's a big, massive barrier to access. So the very, very long answer to that, Callum, and I'm sorry that took so long, but I'm also not, is that is why access is often done badly. Thank you.
A long answer can be a good answer as well. It really is. So we have things like the Illustrated Freelancers Guide, which are helping move the conversation forward in one way. But having worked in the accessibility field for a while, something that comes up is we've been having this conversation for decades. So how can we better consolidate and move the conversation forward? Do you think there's any way that that can happen, or would it need that? How can a freelancer make a project more accessible when they don't have that infrastructural support and that consolidation moving forward? I think.
I mean, Jen spoke to this already, but it comes down to funding. You can't, you know, these things are expensive and everyone completely understands why they're necessary, but it's way easier for large organizations or well-funded organizations to make things accessible. You know, surely Edinburgh must be one of the least accessible cities in the world. Like, you know, this is a very higgledy-piggledy little place. It's very unusual. You have streets that are so thin that you can't put access ramps in and things like this. These are all conversations that need to be had, but they're also issues that need to be well funded. There's also, I think, a tendency to speak slightly more to the last question, I suppose. People do think there are simple answers, like Jen, like you said, they do think, well, we'll just do this and it will be accessible. And for things like, I'm speaking more from like a literature events perspective, there's a kind of thing of like, well, every event is now going to be hybrid. But then, I mean, I've experienced a thing where a writer had like an ex who basically the writer couldn't really be filmed for their own safety. And that is a necessary conversation that they need to have with the people as well. So a flexible approach, I think, is really, really important to kind of reach out with accessibility, but also not to come back to it, funding. You know, a lot of creative organizations are really scrappy little combinations of people trying to do their best, or they're freelancers who've come together to just do a project. And they will have enormous budgetary constraints. It's often people working for free. It's often people working completely underpaid, as you said, but maybe around a full-time job. And these are huge conversations, huge projects. You need enormous lead-in times to make sure that things are properly accessible. And all this needs to be well-funded. And you can't expect tiny organizations to be able to do it. So those tiny organizations, if they can't have access to this funding, can't do accessible events, can't make their information more accessible, will cease to exist. And then that will be a negative thing for freelancers. It will be a negative thing for smaller emerging artists and things like this. So funding there needs to be a huge, huge conversation about where this funding is going to come from, how it's going to get to the right people, and a long-term thing. It can't just be a COVID recovery budget. It needs to be a full long-term budget about accessibility, open to all kinds of different organizations and freelancers too. Easy, right? Yeah, it's very simple. Did you want to add that, Maria? Oh, I'm not trying to do anything.
Thank you very much. So when pushing for change or trying to make a difference, it can be at a real detriment to who is pushing for that change, especially if you're a freelancer or you're one person in a large organization. How can I see things like the guide as helping build a community which makes change? When should an individual know to give up on pushing for that change? Should they? And how can we work as a community to make that change?
I think the element of collective responsibility can sometimes feel like a joy and sometimes feel like a massive heavy weight. I think there is a lot to be said for understanding that we will all burn out on this from time to time, and we need to operate collectively so that when one person has to step out for a bit, others pick up the slack until they're ready to come back in, which is easier said than done, given that we're not operating in any kind of formal system here. There is no way of going, hello, fellow freelancers, I'm tired, I need to not do this for a bit, can someone else pick up where I left off? The level of organization that would take blows my tiny mind. But the feeling that we are all in this struggle and we do all need to do what we can, that is important. And feeling the weight of it is perhaps not a bad thing, because it reminds us that there are other people that we're also fighting for. It's not just about advocating for your own needs, it is about advocating for everybody's. And I think there's possibly something in what you were saying about the sort of modeling a conversation, the giving people something to work through, giving examples of what small things you can do that hopefully don't take too great a toll, but can actually make a big difference. My favorite example is just bringing people into the conversations. If you know other freelancers, if you know people who are new to this, show them that you're willing to share your knowledge. Bring them into the whisper networks. Those are always a big thing. You know, if you know which companies do and don't pay, who will treat you well and who you should be wary of, you know, without risking defamation lawsuits, share the information that you have. You know, if you know someone's being interviewed for a job in a particular place, or that they're considering applying for a particular thing, I think we're all quite afraid of being seen to badmouth potential employers, but there is something to be said for just dropping a fellow freelancer a message and going, hey, I see that you're sharing this, you're applying for that, you're being interviewed for this. Just a heads up, they took 6 months to pay me. So check in with them about what their payment schedules are now. That's not bad mouthing. That is just truth. You know, that's just information that it's useful to have going in. You know, if you see someone who's going to take a gig at a university for the first time, ask them if they know what that's like if they're prepared, because preparation is a big part of this. Just knowing that you might get messed about and that it's not just you is the other important thing, because I don't know that. I spend a lot of time, or I did when I was setting out, feeling like all of these struggles were just me. And it was just me being awkward. And it was probably because I'd messed something up in the first place, and I probably hadn't sent them the right information. And I really do struggle with numbers. So I probably wrote the wrong thing down. And that's why they've, you know, deducted tax at source, despite the fact that I'm a freelancer. You know, all of that kind of thing felt like it was probably my failure in the first place. And it was only when I had other people telling me, no, that's not just you, they will do that to everybody, that's the system that's the problem, that I felt some level of relief that it wasn't me. And they were able to help tell me how to correct the situation, tell me what had worked for them. The sharing of information is a massive and important thing. And that's why things like the guide are incredibly useful. But it's something that can happen on the smaller scale if we look out for each other. Do you want the mic back, or do you want something?
Yeah, I think a lot of big organizations in particular have this mentality, or even have been advised to like take as much as they can. So, you know, this is also why I prefer to have my own contract that I send, so that it's on my terms, because I know what they need a license for, probably. Like I probably know what they need. They probably don't need copyright assignment for a spot illustration. But there is this sort of tendency to try to claim ownership over as much as possible, and then you have to kind of fight them back on it. For example, when I was doing some comics for Condé Nast, I was looking through their contracts, and they were non-negotiable on this, which meant that I've just not done any more work for them, which is that if you were to draw a character more than 3 times or more for them, that's the only place you can publish it. If I've made a character and I had 3 comics that they published, that's the only place I can publish stories about that character. And it's, why? You haven't bought, you'll still have to like agree to publish every single comic. This is ridiculous. But it's because of this idea of like, oh, you know, try to take as much as you can. And so there's a lot of like the whisper networks, freelancers looking out for each other. I was doing work on an anthology, and I got the page rate, and I thought, that doesn't seem great. And I contacted one of the other artists who I kind of knew, and I asked, can I ask what you're getting paid for this? Which was more. And then she did something amazing, which was CC everybody and say, this is what I think the fair rate should be. We should be quoting separate amounts. And it worked, and it was amazing. And that was obviously a lot of work on her part, but it's meant that I also now have that template for going forward if I were to do anthology work, to make sure, hey, I've noticed that you're asking everybody to quote. That might mean that people are going to get paid different amounts. Have you thought about not doing that? Which is, yeah, really helpful.
Can I just add a little? Sorry, Callum, we've taken over. I know that we're like wrapping up, but I think I would like to drop a kind of provocation in, which I think is something we're all skirting around, and that is the need for something like a freelancers union, or perhaps oh, look at that, so much nodding. Oh, that's the most agreed with thing I've ever said. A freelancers union, or like a creative unions congress. Or hang on, is that? I'm just going to make sure it's not some horrible slur or like offensive word for genitalia. You know, so something like this, which brings freelancers together, because you do have organizations, the ones we link to, a lot of these are very disparate. It would be great if we had a freelancers union that had a really strong disability, you know, element to it, so we could really start to work together to be like, here are access needs, here are the funding needs, this is what needs to happen. And also it was really nice to know that you're not alone in dealing with this kind of stuff, that, you know, other people have done work they've not been paid for, that's not okay, how to fight against this. I'm going to say I'm not going to do this because I'm very tired, but if someone is younger than me, better at organizing, and has a lot more energy, I think these are conversations that could be really, really useful, and that could help us be less tired as freelancers, and could really help with the accessibility to the arts in general.
Large organizations provide space and support for that. You have a duty to do so.
Quite right. Thank you very much. We've formed a union, and I know on the guides, I think the last chapter is also, that's about collective organising, isn't it? And I think it's got like links to the disability union and things like that. But I do think there is a great space for it, that I'm glad to be with the 3 founding members of it today. Thank you very much to Heather, Maria and Jen.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. We'd love to open the conversation. So I've got comments from online that I'd like to share. So from Linda Campbell, she says, I have a special interest in accessibility for performers with learning disabilities, especially those who have aspirations to perform, but due to the system of education have hitherto love that word, been subject to low expectations of ability and so not encouraged to pursue a career in the creative practice. There are no peer networks for learning disabled performers, and it is very difficult to break through barriers to inclusion and be welcomed as an equal. Peer networks, I mean, which integrate neurotypical people with learning disabled people. That's sort of just a comment from Linda. I don't know if... We're good. Okay, I'll keep going. Monty from Leet Walk Police Box says, can you give us a few tips for formatting posters, adverts, emails, or social media, or any comms for so that it's easy for visually impaired and dyslexic people to read? So I don't know if you have any comments on the illustrated part, or...
You can actually reach out to...
Sorry, because they won't hear you, Anna.
Oh, sorry. I don't think that's, Maria, you'll be able to speak to that most out of the three of us, I think, but you can, there are organizations that you can reach out to. You can reach out to like Dyslexia Scotland, I think they're called. You know, there are charities and organizations that have been doing this work for much longer than this conversation has been at the forefront, and they will be really helpful to you for things like that. I also wanted to say, I think there might be a performance group for neuroatypical performers, and I think it might be listed in the guide somewhere. I just can't remember it off the top of my head. Jen, maybe you'll know.
Yes, there's the Scottish Neurodiverse Performers Network, I think is what it's called. If you enter that term into the Facebook search engine, there is a Facebook group that you should be able to find. In terms of groups that integrate neurotypical and neurodiverse and learning disabled artists, informally, this is something that I do within one of the classes that I teach. I run something called the Actors Gym for Edinburgh Acting School, and we have a network of all sorts of different actors. We certainly do not let people having encountered low expectations of them prove an impediment. So if that is something that's potentially useful to you, Linda, please do get in touch, and we'd be happy to talk to you further about that. There was one other that I was going to mention. Oh yes, on the formatting of posters, something that I've been hearing from people is that having a QR code so that it can lead to a website so that people can use things like screen readers is really, really useful to some folk. So possibly, because there's no one size fits all in terms of formatting, having a QR code where people can possibly approach information in ways that suit them better might be a good thing.
Okay. Maria, did you have a comment?
Sorry. Just in terms of like the design aspect of it, there are typefaces that are dyslexia friendly, and there are typefaces that can be very difficult to read. So things like that are good to look into, as well as making sure that there is enough contrast in terms of colors so that it's readable, and also hierarchy of information. I think having like at least like 3 levels of information makes things easier to digest and scan. I mean, that was one of the things that I found quite difficult with the old guide that I showed, is that even the headlines are the same size as the rest of the text. So it's just kind of hard to look at.
Yeah, just that I know of, there's a new young company for adults with learning disabilities that's been founded this year at Cutting Edge Theatre. So maybe the commenter might like to have a wee look at that.
Great, thank you so much, Linda. I hope that was helpful, Linda Online, and to Monty as well. So these are just comments, so I'll just quickly pass through them. From Linda as well. I like Jen's section, especially about the assumptions of folk, I can't say it in my Maltese accent, I'm sorry, folks, make about access need to support. And then another comment from Samantha Horobin. Jen touched on some really good points there about assumptions. I walk with a stick sometimes. It depends on how I'm feeling that day, but because I don't need it all the time, people assume I'm either faking it or is not as bad as I am. I'm really sorry, Samantha, that happens. Then we had a helpful comment from Jasmine, who was helping with the dyslexia fund. So thank you so much, Jasmine. And also a few other links to different unions. So I'll make sure that those are disseminated to people in the room as well, the links that were on the Zoom chat. So I'd like to open the floor now to the room. I think that's all the comments that were received online. And please, online, please keep commenting. We'll keep answering. So does anyone in the room have any questions or any notes that they'd like to point out? Yes, hello, hi.
Sorry, the interpreter can't hear.
I'm gonna ask you.
I can't hear anyone, sorry.
Because if not, they can't hear you. And yeah, no, it doesn't reach. I'm so sorry. It's very limited. Or else the BSL interpreters can't interpret. I'm so sorry.
Hi. It wasn't my idea to be so at the center, but I just so I'm a foreigner in this country as a, I guess, freelance creative practitioner, and I really appreciate this kind of space for us, because it's not a secret that cultural venues in Edinburgh or even UK are very multicultural, and lots of people here, I'm sure, are from different places in the world who might be staying for longer or even establishing their practice here and making, I guess, cultural and freelancing more rich and yeah, just diverse. I'm very curious, and I guess I still haven't read the whole guide. I'm very thankful for that, because we're both, me and my husband, I'm an architect, textile designer, and he's an artist and video maker. But we're very, there's a barrier for foreigners, even if we're talking about, I'm just someone who decided to establish here for a while, but I'm sure there's people who have come here for political reasons, or given that this country is so welcoming for refugees even, or other kinds of communities in the world, which I think is amazing. It would be very useful if we had like a glossary of what disability means, because from our cultures and from our points of views, we come from places where, for example, dyslexia is not even a thing. It's not even diagnosed. So sometimes we give for granted things that in the way as creatives have been disabilities, or even have been assets for our creative practice, because let's say it, sometimes being dyslexic actually makes you more creative to some extent, or not speaking the local language. I guess like you were saying, you express yourself better through images. Sometimes that happens when we don't speak assertively in a language that is not our own, or even not knowing that certain things that are in this culture considered as disabilities and should be considered as disabilities everywhere, or at least have tools to access to help how to cope with that. I just realized that there's this executive disability, this executive dysfunction. So kind of a glossary of what those things might be for people that are being creative practitioners, freelancers from different cultures, establishing themselves here. That would be very, very nice. I'm sorry, I'm just like.
No, that was amazing. Thank you so much. Sorry, I'm sorry, guys. We're limited with the tech, so I'm really sorry that you had to come up here, but thank you so much for the comment. And as a fellow immigrant, I totally understand. Did anyone want to answer that?
Thank you, Laura, for that point. I would just like to add on to that, that glossary is also particularly useful if you come from particular working class backgrounds in Scotland, where awareness of the sort of the breadth of disability and things like the social model. I came to awareness of some of these things in my 30s. You know, this wasn't current in my childhood or my sort of earlier adulthood. The shift has been considerable just within the past decade or so. And I think the bringing of people into that conversation who are coming from other cultures, or not sort of operating on the default assumption that everyone's got a kind of middle class background and access to information that goes with that. That is really, really important. The idea of a glossary is really interesting, but I would suggest, I do not have such a thing to hand, but if you Google the term social model of disability, I think you'll find some really interesting things in there. And if you want to talk about executive dysfunction anytime, please feel free to connect with me. I am not claiming any level of expertise, but I've lived with it all my life and I'm very happy to chat.
Can I just actually... Oh, sorry, thank you.
Yeah, there are some great organizations, disability advocate organizations who will have that kind of information as well, which is really good. But I actually wanted to speak to a point more to do with what you were speaking about at the start, which is the inclusivity of creative spaces in Scotland. And I think one thing that is actually a barrier to people who have come from other countries is that a lot of funding will not be paid out to people from different countries. So even a lot of the COVID recovery money in the creative industries could only be paid out to people who are from the UK, which seems to me to be hugely discriminatory. And I'm sure there is some sort of political reason for it, but I think that is one that needs to be addressed. Also, sometimes people on sort of extraordinary talent visas, for instance, don't have recourse to public funds. So that really prevents them having funding in times like pandemics when there needs to be creative funding available. So I don't have any answer to that. It's just, I think, a conversation that also needs to be had about creating really inclusive spaces with people like you as well, Laura. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I was wanting to comment on that. Hola.
I'm going to bring that chair because I think we've got a learning from today. Apologies, we don't have a handheld mic. I think we should have one so that people don't have to move around the room if they don't want to come to the front. Really interesting to hear those views. Thank you so much. I would like to say a few things. One of them is that we have a very small team. So I was thinking, are we a big organization? We're not. There's 5 of us part-time, supporting 5,200 creatives, mainly freelance in the city and beyond. And I'm pleased to say we're all from a different country with a different accent. And it was really great recruiting this brand new team and giving people from different heritage backgrounds and different nationalities a chance to step up and also bring their perspective and be united by wanting to support creatives in our city. So we'd be delighted if you wanted to work with us and come and join us as a member. And so, because we really do understand what it means being in Scotland as someone from a different place. I'm originally from Poland, and it took me many years to find my way in the city and in the country. And it's really brilliant that we can now support others in doing so. So there will be things happening specifically for people who are identify as international creatives based in Scotland and especially in Edinburgh. We're going to be organizing events to bring those people together and share ideas, but also challenges and tell us what they would benefit from. One of the ideas which has emerged recently when we had a consultation with mentors and mentees who come and work with us, they were saying that perhaps we could be offering mentoring in different languages, because among our mentors, we've got people who are bilingual and who would be able to give advice or part of the mentoring in a different language. So there's loads of ideas. And as far as the tips, more practical tips around social disability, for example, are concerned, we are currently redeveloping our website, and on the new website we'll have a resources page where I think not only will we have the brilliant Freelancers guide, which by the way we have distributed hundreds of copies to everyone we know, and everywhere we go we take them with us. We will have resources around disability, accessibility, inclusion, diversity, because I think it makes sense for us to do so. And also I love the idea of the Freelancers Union. If that emerges, if it's created, we'd love to.
Leaders,
yeah. we'd love to help with that. But I just wanted to say that Creative Edinburgh exists
to support and to advocate for the rights and needs and wants of freelance creatives and sole traders and small businesses. But we've got mostly on our books freelancers. We are free to join, so you don't have to have a budget. And what we do, apart from organizing events like this to help bring people together in the room and network, we also do speak to the government and advocate for change. So, for example, I was invited to speak to the Minister of Just Transition and Fair Work, and added the word freelance to some of the policies which are upcoming, and then part of the economic just transition advisory group at the Chamber of Commerce. And again, we are rewriting documents which they're working on in order to include creatives who are freelancers and self-employed and sole traders and somewhere in between into the mix. So it feels like it's our mission. In fact, it is part of our vision, mission and values and inclusivity and helping people to have sustainable businesses. We're 5 part-time people trying to support 5,200, but we can only do it if we know what is needed. So this is really useful. I've got loads of notes, and please do tell us more if you don't feel confident to come here and sit in the middle or stand. Send us an email, tell us on social media, come to speak to us. We are based in this building and we're around. That was just this comment. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah, go for it, Philip. Thank you very much. Oh, sorry, very tall man approaching. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hello, guys. So I'm just on the brink of finishing my degree in advertising, promotion, and so on and so on. So just making some notes, and I would be very interested, extremely interested, I would say, to I think this idea is what you were coming up with your struggles and issues. I would be addressed in a more campaign-wise. I would be very interested to write campaign or be a part of a campaign, because since my childhood, I've always been with my heart in Scotland, maybe less than Poland. And one of the ideas, one of my dreams is to promote artists, because I know that you come across very hard road with so many stones and roses, of course the painful roses. But through the campaign, I would address the issues. I would go for the Scottish government, changing the law, changing the rights, especially when you told about why there is no companies. So I just joined a company, I can say which one, don't want to get fired. But the main problem is lack of communication, and I would say lack of visualizations in companies. As I'm writing a dissertation about how brands communicate with customers and so on. You communicate with people. All of us communicate with people. We have different disabilities. Like I more communicate with more into visual form rather than tone of text, which is pointless to read. When you have a contract for a job and there is like, let's say 10 or 20 pages of text, I don't bother to read, but when I need to. So raise awareness through different channels, because now societies communicate through different channels, and the campaigns to reach companies and universities through changing system, changing contracts, more transparency, which is now very popular. So just to simplify everything, as you said. So I would be very keen to prepare anything, even through the telly, as I got some networkings. So just to put out the words, because beside us, there are still emerging artists or very shy artists or with disabilities. As I came across by myself, I'm dyslexic and got on a spectrum, but I met lots of artists who were not there to reach you guys, but they would still be a part of the family. So I'm very happy to help in any case.
Very nice, Philip. Thank you very much. More friends like, yes, great. Right. Do we have any questions that we'd like to pass on to the panel? Yes, hello.
Well, I was just going to maybe say two things which are kind of on my mind about the whole.
Sorry, the interpreter's struggling to hear. I can't hear.
Oh, sorry, is it switched on?
You have to go further away, sorry, you have to move the mic.
Oh, down. I was holding it close, right. Is that better?
That's better, thank you.
Okay, right, sorry about that.
No, sorry.
No, just two things that are just on my mind about this. One is kind of like a question, and the other one is kind of elephant in the room thing, which I probably would be advised not to say, but I'll say it. The question is self-employment even the right model for artists? Seriously, not a rhetorical question. And the other one is, the elephant in the room is kind of, the political culture that we're living in does not like artists, and is quite happy if legislation has been changed and makes things difficult for artists and educators. Mm-hmm. And it's gone, the corrosive process has gone deeper into the education process. Artists are still trying to make a stand against a lot of these things, but we get exhausted by it. But that suits a lot of the political culture. So one is an observation, and the other is a question, and a serious question.
Thank you very much for that question. That's great. Who would like to tackle that question first? Thanks, Jen.
Thank you. Is self-employment the right model for artists? For this artist, no, absolutely not. Is being employed by someone else the right model for me? And even bigger, no, it's not. I kind of hate living with the feeling that I'm not meant for this world and the systems within it, but that is very much how it feels. And I'm sure that will be familiar to quite a lot of you, whether you have a disability or not. It always feels like everything is there to impede us from actually doing the things that we're good at. The only thing that makes sense, I think, as a way of setting artists free to actually do their thing, and it's the one thing that I can absolutely see why certain governments would not want to implement, because it would allow us to circumnavigate all the kind of terrible effects on education and the arts, is UBI. And I realize we've been throwing around the term UBI, assuming that everyone knows what that stands for. If you do not, it's universal basic income. It is the concept of everyone being given a small basic sum of money that covers your living expenses and allows you to exist at a basic level without having to specifically work for that money. And then if you want other stuff, you can get a job and work for that money and get new cars and holidays or whatever. Or if you are happy just to sort of scribble away on the amount of money that you're given through UBI, you can do that. It's a really, really interesting idea, and far too good an idea to be universally embraced, I suspect. Yeah. Am I passing on to one of you?
Yes, I think that universal basic income would be amazing. I know I would be making my best work if I didn't have to worry about my bills. And in terms of like freelancing and talking to other people about their possible futures in freelancing, I'm not trying to sell anybody on it. It works for different people for different reasons, and sometimes it's a necessity, and it's not just artists. The gig economy is a thing. A lot of, I think, what was it, 30% more people become freelancers every year in the UK. I think in a lot of cases that is not for the love of being self-employed. It is out of necessity, and so the Freelancer's Guide is just about what to do if this is the situation that you're in, and some advice for it. But whether it is like whatever your freelancing situation is, whether it is ideal, I think a different society would be ideal.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. Is self-employment the best route? It brings, I always think of that meme, which is like, I do not dream of labor. You know, there is no dream job. I do not dream of labor. We would all love it if we could just create. And this is why I think UBI something, or like, you know, different versions of UBI, minimum income guarantee, you know, this is a conversation we need to start having. And you're completely right that this is not a political climate. And I think in this country, we're like desensitized, we're taught to not expect things. We're taught to not kind of hope that there might be some huge political change that everyone knows would be for the benefit. We're taught to go, yes, well, it will be very expensive. And, you know, the government only has this much kind of money. The government doesn't only have this much. I'm not going to get into economic theory, but there are different ways of doing things. And you just need to look around the world. There are hugely different ways of running countries, of funding artists and these kind of things. And I would love it if people weren't trapped into a model of self-employment. We were talking about this earlier. People, Maria teaches, and some people say to her, well, how do I get a full-time illustration gig? Well, what is that job? You know, what is a full-time novelist's job? How is that funded? They just don't exist. So you get pushed into self-employment, and it does require a lot from you. I would say full-time employment, from my experience, also isn't all that, as you said, Jen. It can be, if you have a great employer. Working for a union is pretty fantastic because it's a union. Join a union, create more unions. But yeah, I think we really do need to start pushing this conversation politically. Like, how can we do things differently? It can't just be a slightly better version of what we've got now, because even in Scotland, where we've got a better version of what they've got in England, it's all just slowly getting worse and worse and worse. The cost of living is, you know, skyrocketing. How can we do things better? How can we do things different? And it will require a huge, big, radical change, but there's no other option. We just can't go on like this. God, that's a really sad way to end what I was saying. I think there is a chance for a different way of doing things. And I really hope that we can start having those conversations properly.
Pass the mic. Thank you. I think, yeah, and to end on a more positive note, I think it's always really good to have people that are like-minded come into a room, discuss. And I know it's hard when large organizations don't come into the room with you to have those discussions, but hopefully, as we try to emphasize and has the chapter in the book, collectively as freelancers, we can work together to start to make some sort of change if we're having the discussions amongst ourselves to know what differences we can make as well. So, do we have any other questions? Go for it. Great.
Hopefully this is a slightly more hopeful note to end on. Coming back to the guide itself, I find it so informative. It's the sort of thing I wish I had when I was in university or school. What are your kind of hopes for the future with this guide? If you kind of had unlimited resources for it, would you wish to bring it into schools, universities? Yeah, what are your kind of hopes for the future with it?
Thank you very much. Maria.
I mean, I think that there is scope for the Freelancers Guide to exist in other editions for more specific types of freelancers, like for specific industries. Yeah, I don't know if you wanted to add more. Oh yes, other languages.
Yeah, so it's worth saying, I think, that these guides are free, but we did not work for free on these guides. We were funded to create these guides. And all this kind of stuff does require funding. So it would be contingent on payment for that coming from somewhere, because it's a huge amount of work. And then obviously we have to pay the people who translate them into kind of easy read, amazing professionals. They all deserve to be paid properly as well. But if money were no object, we would love to get it into kind of like all schools. We would love to have free print copies available. I'm really interested in this idea of doing the industry specific versions of it, because obviously for a writer and a illustrator, for a graphic artist, for a visual artist, incredibly different details. And I would like to take those details and make them more accessible, because they're really intense. And again, if you're a union and you have loads of money kicking about and you want to make that happen, do speak to us. But also something like an app, would be amazing. You know, there are really different ways to approach this information, and for a lot of people, it being in a book or in a PDF isn't the best one. A website, a searchable website, wouldn't that be so good to be like, what do I do here? What are my options? You spoke about the rate sharing websites. They do exist. I know a team at a university are working on an app for freelancers, which would take this kind of information and make it interactive, which I think is great. So I do want to say, other people, please do run with these ideas and turn them into your own projects as well. There can't be too many projects of this type, I think. Can I also just say thank you so much to the BSL interpreters. I know I speak very quickly and I'm really sorry about that. You've been amazing.
No, it's honestly, I probably need to apologize for my way of speaking as well, don't worry. So I'm just going to stop the questions here because we've run over quite a lot, but that's really good because more conversation was had. I'd like to open the floor to networking now. For those of you online, we'll open up breakout rooms in a couple of minutes so that you can also speak to the other people at the event who are online. And yeah, please enjoy the teas and coffees in the room. To the online people, I hope you have some beverage with you to enjoy the rest of the event. And thank you very much, everyone.